A fire destroys almost everything in the museum, but Emma Johnson, a humble janitor, saves a rare artwork that changed her life forever. Now, a gang wants her unique talent to forge billion-dollar prices and threaten her family. Even Robert Castle, the billionaire, is willing to risk it all to protect her. Let us know in the comments which city you are watching from and rate this story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very valuable. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel to receive more exciting stories like this one. The air was heavy that early morning in New York. The distant smell of smoke lingered over Fifth Avenue as Emma Johnson adjusted her backpack full of rags and cleaning products. As the night janitor of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, she knew every corner of that old building, from the open areas to the hallways where deliberately forgotten artworks rested in silence. Her uniform was already stained with the sweat accumulated from hours of work, yet her eyes sparkled when she arrived at the room of Renaissance paintings, where one specific painting called to her like a whisper from the past. It was a rare, aged piece, with colors that time had almost consumed, but still held immense beauty. As she cleaned the floor, she heard the dry crack, the first sign of the disaster to come. A gray smoke began to invade the hallways, along with the pungent smell of burning. Panic quickly spread. The distant sound of sirens announced that the fire was no ordinary threat. Without hesitation, Emma ran toward the relic room. The heat already made the glass tremble, and urgency tightened her chest. Inside, with sweat running down her temples, she carefully removed the precious painting from its stand. She wrapped it gently in an old sheet she had brought with her, protecting every inch of the canvas as if she were holding a piece of her own hope. As she exited, her face was smeared with soot, her eyes burned, and her body trembled. But the painting was safe. The crowd forming outside watched, among firefighters and onlookers, the threat that was slowly consuming the museum. It was then that a tall man, wearing an impeccable suit, emerged from the smoke. Robert Castle, a billionaire collector and one of the most influential names in the art market in the United States. His gaze analyzed everything with the coldness of someone used to controlling destinies, but there was something different about him, a real and visible restlessness. "What are you doing with that?" he asked, his voice firm and a bit harsh, gesturing toward the painting wrapped in Emma's arms. Surprised by the authority in his voice, she clutched the sheet against her chest, her heart racing. "I work here. I was cleaning when the fire started. I saved this painting." Her voice came out choppy, but filled with a hard-to-deny truth. He looked her up and down, as if seeing a stranger in a scene that did not match that environment of luxury and power. "Janitor, huh? I thought you were a security guard." Her face flushed, a mix of shame and indignation. "I don't like when people doubt my hands. I have a talent for restoration, learned from my grandfather. This artwork is my dream." Robert stared at her for long seconds, during which the smoke seemed to pause. Finally, a brief, almost teasing smile crossed his face. "The art world isn't made for solitary dreamers, Ms. Johnson, but recognition is something I understand well. I'll schedule a visit for you. I want to see what you can really do. Just don't confuse things." His voice lowered to an almost friendly tone. "I haven't decided yet if this is courage or madness." Before she could respond, a firefighter called him to assess the situation urgently. Robert stepped away, allowing the crowd's gaze to turn back to Emma, who remained there, embracing the painting as if it were the last anchor of her future. As the fire consumed ancient walls and shattered illusions, a new story began to unfold, marked by the unexpected collision between a world of luxury and power and another of humble dreams, of hands that clean and restore silently, but that can change everything. Emma felt her body tired, her face marked by soot and the acrid smell of smoke. Beside her, the sirens continued to wail, and in her mind a mix of fear and hope. She knew that meeting Robert Castle would be just the first chapter of a journey she had never imagined. A journey that would go far beyond the destroyed walls of that museum. The future began there, in pieces of paint and courage. Let's do an experiment. Those following this story, write "in love" in the comments. Your participation is very important. The next day, the sun had barely risen over New York, when Emma was already at the hospital where she worked as a janitor. The environment, filled with the monotonous sounds of heart monitors and voices whispering concern, contrasted sharply with the battle she had lived through the night before. Now, in the rhythmic silence of the hallways, her mind rehearsed the repetition of the unexpected encounter. However, fate had other plans. While pushing a cleaning cart down a corridor filled with nurses and patients, she felt a shiver when a deep voice called, "Emma Johnson?" She stopped, her body tense, facing the man in a dark suit who approached her. Robert Castle, with a slight smile on his lips, watched her with a mix of interest and curiosity. "It's you," he confirmed, surprised. What are you doing here?" "I came to check if you regret the scheduled visit," he said, diverting his gaze to the white, polished floor where his own footsteps echoed. Emma tried to hide a nervous smile, diverting her eyes to the badge pinned to her uniform. "Me? Regret? Never. But continuing to see me in the hospital corridors, I'm not sure if this is the ideal setting for—" Robert laughed, a low sound, almost intimate, that encapsulated a softness hidden beneath his usual arrogance. "The world is what we make of it, Emma. Here today, tomorrow at some expensive auction house, but let's take it slow. I don't want to scare you." The dialogue flowed with an unexpected naturalness, even though the differences between them seemed like an invisible chasm, occupying every inch of the space between the words. The glances they exchanged carried a silent tension, curiosity, admiration, and something more that neither of them wanted to name just yet. Over the following weeks, their casual encounters became routine. Robert would show up with small gestures, an occasional coffee delivered during her shift, a smile that seemed to seek refuge in her sincerity, a discreet compliment about her work with the painting. Emma, in turn, was suspicious of the kindness behind those gestures. On the street, she saw the social buzz about the billionaire and his power plays in business, while at the hospital, she felt the weight of family responsibilities and the bills that insisted on piling up. On a rainy afternoon, when the grey sky filtered the little light through the hospital windows, Robert approached with a different smile. "Let me be honest, Emma," he began in a serious tone, walking beside her down the corridor. "You have a talent that the world isn't used to recognizing. The girl who saves a painting from flames might have something to say about courage and passion. I want to help in some way." She stopped, catching the sweet scent of the coffee he held in his hand. The raindrops drummed against the windows like a racing heartbeat. "Robert, you don't know anything about my life. The daily struggle to keep the family together, the lack of money to pay for my father's treatment. It's not just wins and losses at auctions, you know." He looked at her intensely, realizing the vulnerability that this brief moment of honesty revealed. It was too brief to linger, but long enough for the walls he had built to start cracking. "I don't intend to be invasive," he said, lowering his voice. "I just want you to know that you don't have to face everything alone." The silence that lingered between them was heavy, filled with the distant sound of a nurse guiding patients with a sweet voice, and the constant hum of the machines that saved lives right there. Days passed, and with them, an unexpected camaraderie blossomed between the two, a mix of mutual respect, fascination, and an unease that both tried to control. Robert, who always walked alone between meetings and gala dinners, began to allow himself more spontaneous smiles thanks to Emma's simple and genuine presence. She, who had learned to hide amidst a difficult routine for so long, felt a different warmth each time he appeared, a good discomfort that made her body vibrate and her legs tremble discreetly. It was during a break at the hospital, while they shared a piece of chocolate truffle, rich, sweet, and full of childhood memories, that Robert said something she didn't expect. "You know, most people think I only talk to those with bank accounts similar to mine, but you have shown me a different world, a kind of value that is priceless, Emma." She smiled, her heart tightening, trying not to be swept away by the mix of fear and hope. "You're going to end up destroyed by what you don't know." Before she could elaborate, her phone rang, breaking the atmosphere that was beginning to take root. It was her father. She knew the moment she answered. The weak, tired voice on the other end reminded Emma that her battles were far from over. Robert saw the look of concern take over her face and slowly held the hand that was about to rest on the phone. "I will help you," he said firmly, "in my own way." And so, between glances and restrained gestures, they began a relationship that, despite the almost abyssal differences, started to break down barriers. First distrust, then pride, until reaching something that only the heart understands. But the road ahead would be marked by harsh trials, difficult decisions, and choices that would test everything they believed about love, success, and the true essence of who we are. Each day, Emma and Robert walked on unfamiliar ground, where hope and fear intertwined in a delicate dance, about to transform into something definitive. Let's conduct an experiment. Those following this story, write "passionate" in the comments. Your participation is very important. The gentle breeze of the autumn afternoon in New York, mixed with the intense aroma of fresh coffee wafting from the small bakery on the corner of Broadway. Emma entered slowly, her eyes still heavy with the worry she couldn't shake off. The phone had been interrupting her thoughts since the call to the hospital. Her father's health, fluctuating day by day, was a shadow that insisted on following her every minute. She settled at a table in the corner, away from the busy street, and absent-mindedly watched the droplets trickle down the fogged windows. The view of the city that never sleeps seemed distant, almost irrelevant in the turmoil within her chest. It was at that moment that he appeared, as if he had read her thoughts. Robert entered with that firm posture, but a more genuine smile, wanting to cut through the tension like someone throwing an anchor to calm another's storm. "I thought I'd bring this," he said, pulling from the bag an elegant envelope with the Castle Art crest printed in gold. "It's an advance to help with the bills, so you won't spend any sleepless nights worrying about what you can't pay." She furrowed her brows, her heart tightening, confused between wounded pride and pressing need. "Robert, I can't accept this." He sat down in the opposite chair, his hands wrapped around a porcelain mug, warm like the coffee that was starting to cool around them. "I don't offer favors," he stated, looking deeply into her eyes. "I offer opportunities. You have a talent that the world ignores just because it thinks art has a face and a last name. I want to change that." Emma swallowed hard, feeling tears threaten to escape. "You don't know what it's like to fight against this invisibility every day. It's not just about money," she admitted, her voice low and trembling. "It's the feeling of not being seen, of being discarded." Silence filled the table, broken only by the distant sound of hurried footsteps outside. Robert sighed, his smile so light it almost seemed like a secret. "I also know what it's like to carry the weight of expectations we can't decide," he revealed, as if saying something he would never admit in public. "My family wants me to be a business monster, but I just wanted to be someone who isn't afraid to connect." And the unexpected meeting in that refuge of roasted aromas and quiet conversations opened a door to what neither of them knew they needed: the possibility of simply being human. But not everything would be simple. The next day, as she walked home along St. Benedict Street, she felt piercing stares and whispers that followed her like shadows. The news of her connection with Robert Castle was already circulating, distorted and polluted by dark interests. "Look at that. The janitor became famous overnight," she heard someone comment as she tried to keep calm. Emma quickened her pace, her trembling hands trying to disguise her nervousness. That unexpected exposure meant that the humble life she had always known was beginning to shatter into pieces, and it was in that chaos that an unexpected message popped up on her phone. "We need to talk. Urgent." The sender, an unknown number. She hesitated, her heart pounding against her ribs, her senses heightened in a silent alarm. Upon opening the message, she found only an address and the word, "Today." Against all instincts, she decided to go. If someone wanted to talk to her, whoever it was, she couldn't ignore it. At night, the streets took on a new face. Elongated shadows and artificial lights created sharp contrasts on the wet pavement. Emma walked with firm steps, but her watchful eyes searched for any sign of danger. Upon arriving at the location, a nearly empty cafe with a discreet atmosphere, she found a man with a stern expression and tired eyes watching her from across the counter. "Are you Emma Johnson?" he asked bluntly. She nodded, feeling her body freeze in an automatic reflex. "My name is Charles," he said in a deep voice. "I work for a group interested in your talent. They know what you did, and they want you to do it again, but their way." Shock coursed down Emma's spine. "Their way? I don't do anything illegal." "It's not that simple." Charles lowered his voice, looking cautiously around. "They won't accept a no for an answer. They want to use your skill to forge paintings worth millions that could become a goldmine for them. Do you think you don't know what that means?" She swallowed, feeling the weight of the words. "My family, my life," she murmured, desperation threatening to overflow. Charles stepped closer, as if offering an escape while simultaneously setting a trap. "You have two choices. Enter now, or deal with what comes next. And I warn you," he looked serious, "after that, there's no turning back." Emma knew that the decision wasn't just hers. It already put at risk not only her own skin, but also those she loved. She needed to tell Robert. Only he had the power to perhaps prevent that storm from destroying everything. But trusting wouldn't be easy, and the game that was beginning was worth more than any price on the table. That dawn, as silent tears rolled down her face, Emma gripped her phone tightly. The tremor in her hands revealed more than fear. It was the urgency of someone who knew that night, her life would change forever. "Let's do an experiment. Those following this story, write in love in the comments. Your participation is very important." The phone vibrated in the early morning, a piercing sound that seemed to strike a blow against the oppressive silence of the modest apartment where Emma was trying to take refuge. Once again, her eyes opened, dilated by the anxiety that no longer gave her a break. The illuminated screen showed Robert's name. With trembling fingers, she answered before the ringing stopped. "Emma, where are you?" His voice carried the urgency of someone who knows that time is the enemy and that any delay could be costly. She took a deep breath, trying to organize her jumbled thoughts. "At home, but I need to tell you things that I don't know where to start." Before she could continue, a brutal crash shattered the nearby window, scattering shards that glimmered under the moonlight. Emma turned, her body tense, and saw shadows disappearing into the darkness outside. Her heart raced, a sudden explosion of fear spreading like fire. On the other end of the line, Robert sensed the terrifying silence and, without hesitation, ordered, "Don't move. Be quiet and wait. I'm coming over." In minutes that felt like hours, he traversed the cold streets of the city, his footsteps echoing in the New York night. Every signal, every detail, the texture of the wind cutting across his face, the rustling of wet leaves, kept him alert, ready for anything. His mind raced with improvised strategies, trying to anticipate the unimaginable. When he arrived, he found Emma in the shadow of the hallway of her building, her eyes glazed and her breath quick. Without thinking, he enveloped her in an embrace that was in more shield than affection, a refuge against the silent storm. "Tell me everything," he commanded, his voice low and firm. She held back tears, fear stabbing like a blade in her chest. The words flowed in murmurs, a raw account of threats, blackmail, an underground world that had dangerously settled close to her life. A group. Robert, they want me to forge valuable artworks. If I refuse, they say they will target my family. They are violent, unscrupulous. Robert closed his eyes for a moment, his hand running through his hair, the unconscious gesture of someone seeking strength. I know who they are. We won't let them turn you into a puppet. From then on, the days turned into a race against time. Robert, using his influence and contacts, began to build a protection network for Emma. Surveillance, lawyers, allies in the art and police sectors. Every step was calculated, but the looming threat was invisible, a silent predator ready to strike. Amid meetings, phone calls, and strategies, Robert introduced Emma to a universe she had never imagined. Art galleries, authenticity experts, private security specialists, all to shield not only her integrity, but also the painting, the talent, and the hope she carried. On a rainy night, they walked together down Fifth Avenue under a shared umbrella. Robert held her hand firmly, conveying without words that he was there not just for business, but to face it all side by side. During one of these visits, at an exclusive gallery in Greenwich Village, Emma stared at breathtaking replicas, almost living artworks, carefully crafted to deceive even the most trained eyes. "It's deeper than I thought," she confessed, her voice heavy with unease. "They have a machine set up. It's not just forgery. It's an industry." Robert nodded with a hint of bitterness. "It's a war, and we are right in the middle of it." But the battle was not only against external enemies. Amid the constant tension, they also faced their own fears and insecurities. Emma carried the old fear of being invisible, inadequate in the luxurious and cruel world that Robert inhabited. He, accustomed to protecting himself with arrogance and control, discovered that his heart was laid bare and vulnerable before her sincerity. On a calm morning, while having coffee on her apartment balcony, surrounded by the distant noise of cars and hurried voices, Robert held her hands between his. His gaze, more open than in any previous encounter, sought the courage to express what he felt. "No matter the difficulties that come," he said with raw sincerity, "I want to be with you, because it's not just status or money that interests me anymore. It's you." She averted her eyes, feeling warmth rise from the roots of her hair to her face. "Robert, I'm scared. Scared of what all this could do to us." He smiled, shyly, almost with a sigh. "Fear means we are alive. And now we are in this together." But before they could sigh in relief, her phone rang again, a new message, a sign that the storm was still far from over. It was a summons to continue the game that would decide their fate. In the embroidered dawn of New York, amid insecurities, promises, and dangers that lurked like hungry wolves, Emma and Robert found themselves at a crossroads where love was also about resistance. The journey that had begun seemed to demand everything from them: courage to face the now and hope to dream of tomorrow. Let's do an experiment. Those following this story, write "in love" in the comments. Your participation is very important. The silence that settled after the phone rang felt heavy, as if the air had become too dense to breathe easily. Emma looked at the illuminated screen, the message simple, direct, yet laden with a veiled threat. "Meeting at 8 p.m. Don't fail." There was no sender, no additional details, just the weight of a summons that could not be ignored. Robert, observing her tense face, held her hands firmly, conveying a security that Emma by now knew was fragile, but essential. "We won't let them control every step you take," he said, determination igniting every word. "I'll be by your side, no matter what happens." The clock seemed to conspire against them. The hours separating Emma from that meeting were filled with preparations, doubts, insecurities that seeped into every gesture. She looked at herself in the mirror of her small apartment, noticing the recent dark circles, the marks of worry that life had etched on her face. There was an almost invisible transformation, a woman who succeeded day by day, facing fears with a chest swollen with resistance. The day before that meeting, Emma walked to the farmer's market, the sun already setting over the city, tinting the old facades with amber. She bought fresh fruits, warm bread with a crunchy crust, and, almost as a ritual of normalcy amid the chaos, a pack of homemade chocolate truffles. The sensation of the smooth packaging between her fingers reconnected her with childhood memories, when life was less complicated and the taste of the sweet brought immediate comfort. Upon returning, she sat at the small kitchen table with the yellow light of a hanging lamp above her, and let the tears flow silently. She was scared. Scared of what she could not control. Scared of the choices she would have to make. Robert knocked on the door at the appointed time, bringing with him a mix of woody perfume and the security that no longer seemed so unattainable. He wore a black overcoat that highlighted the firm posture of someone who had faced battles, but never this one. "Let's go together," he said, with a rare tone of softness. In the taxi that took them to the address from the message, an old mansion in Greenwich Village, the windows were darkened, as if the house held dark secrets within its walls. As they crossed the rusty gate, Sandra and Robert were received by a man with a false smile, calculating eyes, exuding an air of silent power. It was Daniel, the leader of the group, seeking to exploit Emma's talent for his own ends. "Robert Castle," Daniel said, with a courtesy that seemed to hide blades. "I've heard a lot about you. And about your friend." Emma felt her chest tighten, as if the air were being sucked out of her lungs. But Robert, always steadfast, replied, "Say what needs to be said. But know that we are here to protect, not to negotiate threats." Daniel smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You are unaware of the game you've entered. The counterfeit art our network produces moves tens of millions, and we do not accept obstacles. Emma, your collaboration is vital." It seemed that the young woman was both a bargaining chip and a prize. Before Robert could respond, Emma stood up, her voice firm despite the tension surrounding her. "I'm not a tool to enrich myself at the expense of lies and crime. My talent will be used for light, not deception." Daniel's gaze compressed into a shadow of disguised anger, but he held back. "So you prefer confrontation? Very well. Prepare for the consequences." Before they could leave, Emma noticed a figure watching from a window on the upper floor. She felt that this game was far from over, and that to survive she would need courage, cunning, and above all, trust in Robert. On the way back, the silence between them was heavy, broken only by the muffled sound of the car engine. Finally, Robert broke the tension. "We are more involved than I imagined. But we will not back down." "Not now." Emma nodded, her thoughts tumultuous. "All I wanted was to paint the world with true colors, without forgeries. And now it seems the world wants to paint me with lies." Robert took her hand, squeezing gently. "Let's show that a brush in the right hands can transform even the darkest shadow." Ndidi. In the days that followed, they devised strategies, meetings with digital security experts, reinforcing the protection of Emma's family, and a bold attempt to infiltrate the criminal network to gather evidence. Despite the fear still flickering in her veins, Emma felt that Robert's strength was the foundation to face the storm that chose no time or place to strike. However, the price of that battle was beginning to weigh heavily. Amid the exhausting routine, their relationship gained layers of tension, small misunderstandings, silent insecurities, and the constant shadow of imminent danger. In a moment of vulnerability, on a rainy late afternoon, Emma broke down. "I don't know if I can take it," she confessed, tears cutting through her rain-soaked face as the rain poured in from the balcony. Robert held her, his voice firm, but with a new touch of softness. "You don't have to bear it alone. Here, with me, you are stronger than you think." And even with hearts marked by battle, they pressed on. Between love and struggles, promises and threats, Emma and Robert discovered that sometimes true power lay in not giving up, even when everything seemed to conspire against them. Let's do an experiment. For those following this story, write passionate in the comments. Your participation is very important. The clock struck almost midnight when Emma decided to walk through the quiet streets of the neighborhood that, despite the hour, still held its own vibrancy, a result of the yellow lights from the lampposts and the distant sound of cars cutting through the main avenues. The scent of recent rain mingled with the earthy aroma of the nearby park's trees, creating a cinematic atmosphere that curiously calmed her for moments. However, her mind was a whirlwind. Images from the previous night, the tense encounter with Daniel, spun like a dark film she couldn't turn off. As she stepped on the uneven sidewalks, Emma tried to swallow the fear that stubbornly gripped her chest, a suffocating sensation that even the cool breeze couldn't dissipate. She stopped at an open newsstand. She bought an old edition of the New York Times and flipped through it distractedly, as if the news about politics and economics had the power to distract her, even if momentarily. Her eyes landed on a headline that seemed an irony of fate. Corruption scandals shake high society in New York. A cruel parallel to her own silent battle. A touch on her wrist made Emma jump. It was a message from Robert. "I was worried you went out so late. Come home. I need to talk." She felt warmth spread across her cheeks, a mix of embarrassment and relief. She quickly replied, "I'll be there soon. Thanks for worrying." On her way back, each hurried step was a kind of escape from what she lived inside and outside herself. The car lights reflected in her wet eyes as she tried to control her quickening breath. Upon opening the door to the apartment, she was greeted by the woody aroma of Robert's cologne, who was already waiting for her in the softly lit living room. "I was worried," he confessed, approaching carefully. "I know," Emma replied, resting her head on his shoulder, seeking in that gesture the security they needed to face whatever came next. Robert pulled her into a firm yet gentle embrace, as if trying to transfer his own strength to her trembling body. The comfortable silence that followed spoke more than any words. "I need you to know that, regardless of what happens out there," he began, his voice laden with contained emotion, "I am here, with you." She lifted her face, her eyes shining from the effort to hold back tears. "It's been hard," she murmured, "but I feel like we're starting to build a fortress, with fear but together." Robert smiled, and in that moment the barrier of pride and distance he had always carried seemed to finally give way. "Let's use that fear. In the silence of the early morning in New York, they promised each other strength, not the kind that comes from invulnerability, but from the courage to be vulnerable with one another. In the following days, Emma's routine mixed with secret meetings and serious discussions with cybersecurity experts and private detectives. The goal was clear: to dismantle the criminal network from within. Robert led everything with the precision and coldness of a strategist, but the glances he cast at Emma revealed the humanity she awakened in him. In the meantime, they also tried to connect in simpler intimacy: impromptu dinners in Emma's modest apartment, shy laughter in front of old movies, and conversations about dreams, those small luxuries that seemed to slip away in the chaos surrounding them. One night after one of those dinners, while they cleaned the kitchen together, Robert commented, half joking, half serious, "I never imagined I would learn to cook beans with you." Emma laughed, the clear sound filling the space. "And I never thought someone like you would enjoy freshly made chocolate truffles." The atmosphere between them became lighter, almost fleeting, but the touch of their hands as they gathered the dishes was a silent reminder of the constant tension that kept them aware of the dangers lurking around. However, the apparent tranquility was hard to bear when a new threat emerged unexpectedly. An anonymous letter arrived at Emma's apartment, the yellowed paper carrying a simple and threatening phrase: "You are a piece of a larger game. Leave before it's too late." Her blood ran cold, and the feeling of vulnerability returned with full force. She sought out Robert immediately, who welcomed her with open arms and a determined expression. "This means they know more than we thought," he said, examining the note. "But we know more too, and we won't back down." Emma felt his presence as a shelter against the impending storm. It was at that moment they understood. The battle was far from over, and the game they had begun would require not only courage and love, but also intelligence, sacrifice, and absolute trust. And even in the face of the shadows that gathered, there was a flame, fragile but persistent, that illuminated their path. Let's do an experiment. For those following this story, write "passionate" in the comments. Your participation is very important. The soft fog crossed the streets of New York that night, wrapping the city in a silent cloak that barely concealed the distant hum of cars and the life that never seemed to slow down completely. Emma and Robert walked side by side, their rhythmic steps echoing on the cobblestone sidewalks as they headed to a meeting with people who could be key in this silent war. The tension hung in the air, palpable like the scent of rain about to fall. As they turned the corner of a narrow street in the East Village, where old lanterns cast trompe-l'oeil shadows on the worn walls, Emma couldn't help but feel a shiver that went beyond the external chill. She felt like a pawn in a game of chess, every move calculated, each play weighing on the uncertain future. At the discreet entrance of an old cafe with low yellow lights and the gentle aroma of roasted coffee, they found Matthew, a forensic expert who had joined the cause in hopes of dismantling the criminal scheme. His gaze was sharp, almost clinical, as if he could see the weaknesses of the human soul among the lines and pigments of the artworks. "Do you have enough data?" Matthew asked, pouring coffee into a white cup as he spoke. "The forgery is exquisite, but there's always a signature, an almost imperceptible flaw." Emma felt drawn to that keen intelligence. It was as if, in that modest hall, she could breathe a little more freely, away from malicious gazes and veiled threats. Robert, on the other hand, maintained a serious demeanor, the weight of responsibility marking every gesture. "Sensors have been installed in the suspicious studios, and we managed to track the entire process," he said. "But the problem is the network. It's vast, with branches that go beyond what we imagined." Matthew nodded, looking at the couple with an expression that combined respect and concern. "You're not in this alone, but you need to take care of yourselves. They will try to counterattack." At that moment, Emma's phone vibrated, silent on the table. A new message. This time, a photo. The image was clear. A hooded figure watched from a distance, the door of her apartment. The simple message read, "Be careful who you trust." Emma's blood ran cold, the coffee nearly slipping from her hand. Robert noticed, gripping hers firmly. "They're close," he said, more to himself than to the others, "and nothing will be the same after this." As they left the cafe, a light rain began to fall, wetting the streets and blurring the outlines of the city, creating an atmosphere conducive to hiding intentions and secrets. They crossed the square, illuminated by old streetlights, the water running in streams down Emma's face, her heart pounding like a heavy drum. In the car that took them back, Robert kept his hands steady on the wheel and his eyes alert on the dark road, while Emma tried to push away the fear that crushed her inside. "Do you think we can take down this network?" she asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. He sighed, as if carrying the weight of the world. "It's not a question of if, but when. And we won't stop until we get there." But the game of shadows and lights spared neither those who chose truth as their weapon. Days later, while Emma reviewed documents in her small makeshift office, the lights were abruptly cut. In the silence, the cold became palpable, as if an invisible shadow had invaded the space. The phone vibrated with an urgent message. "You and Robert have 48 hours to back down. Only, and that way she will be safe." Emma took a deep breath, feeling her energy weighed down by anguish and courage, a dissonant mix that propelled her forward. "They are cornering us," she said to Robert when she found him at home. "But we won't back down." He embraced her, his gaze distant, carrying the weight of the decision they both needed to make. "We will strike the next blow," he promised, "but it will come at a cost." However, amidst plans and strategies, the growing tension threatened to erode the fragile connection they were building. An unexpected misunderstanding erupted on a rainy afternoon when the accumulated pressure transformed the silent room into a ring of emotions. "You're letting all of this consume you," Emma shot back, her voice choked with suppressed tears. Robert clenched his fists, breathing heavily. "And you think I don't know that?" he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But we can't falter now." The unspoken confession hung between them, the emotional distance they feared to create precisely to protect each other. For a moment, silence enveloped them, a space filled with unvoiced fears and contained hopes. "I'm sorry," Emma murmured, her eyes glistening. "Me too," he replied, stepping closer and holding her face in his hands. "We'll get through this together." Moo. And so, amidst the storm of feelings and dangers, Emma and Robert learned that love was not just a refuge, but a battle with its own risks and demands. Every step was a challenge, every glance a bridge to understanding that strengthened their souls amidst the chaos. They were willing to risk everything, for justice, for the future, but above all, for each other. Let's do an experiment. For those following this story, write "passionate" in the comments. Your participation is very important. The early morning in New York always had its own way of revealing secrets hidden beneath the surface of the city. When Emma and Robert entered the old building in the downtown area, the silence was almost palpable, broken only by the sound of their footsteps echoing on the worn marble. The humid air carried a faint scent of mildew mixed with cold coffee that someone had forgotten to throw away. They were heading to a decisive meeting with an anonymous contact who promised to provide the key to dismantling the forgery ring that threatened their lives. The aged envelope in Emma's hands trembled slightly, a result of anxiety and anticipation. "Do you really believe this will help us?" she asked, rolling the document between her fingers, her voice low. Robert looked at her, his expression tired but determined. "It's our last resort. If it goes wrong, well, at least we tried." The elevator ascended slowly through the floors, the red circle of the small light marking their progress like an unyielding indicator of time that was not on their side. When the door opened, they were greeted by a middle-aged man with stubble and fierce eyes, who led them to a room far too simple for what they were about to discuss. The closed air smelled of tobacco and old books. In the center, an oak table held folded papers and a laptop that flickered a faint blue light. "My name is James," he introduced himself in a hoarse voice without smiling. "I know you're in the middle of a storm, and believe me, you're not the only ones who want this network to end. But no one has done what you've done. Infiltrated, resisted, faced it." Ooh. Emma felt the weight of his words like a call, a confirmation that the fight they were waging had invisible allies. "What do you have?" Robert asked, crossing his arms. James pulled a flash drive from a folder and handed it to Robert. "Videos, recordings, bank transactions, everything you need to expose the leaders of the organization. But there's a catch," he added, his gaze darkening. "They know something is happening. If you use this carelessly, the consequences could be devastating." The air in the room grew heavy, filled with the tension that only those facing the abyss know. Emma swallowed hard, warmth spreading through her neck. "And what's the plan?" she asked, firm despite the knot growing in her throat. James smiled for the first time, a tired but sincere smile. "I'll help create a trap. Try to expose most of them at once, with irrefutable evidence. You have to be ready for whatever comes next." The days that followed were a whirlwind. Emma and Robert became central pieces in the game. Secret meetings, encrypted information exchanges, publicity strategies. It was a delicate balance between constant fear and the almost childlike excitement of moving toward victory. But the price was high. On one of those days, Robert received a call that made him close his eyes and hold his breath. "It's your father," he explained, his voice heavy. "He called a little while ago, worried about the exposure you're bringing." Emma realized at that moment the weight Robert carried, the invisible chains of family he was trying to break. He, used to hiding emotions behind firm words, dropped his armor for seconds. "I can't fail," Robert murmured, as if the air in the room was too heavy. Meanwhile, the opposing network was strengthening. Aggressive messages, attempts to infiltrate their systems, threats directed at family members. Emma felt every step she took was monitored, every movement watched. On a particularly tense night, when the heavy rain made the windows of Emma's apartment rattle violently, she received an unexpected visit. "You need to get out of here," said Luke, the detective hired to protect them, his voice tense. "There was an attempted break-in at your building. They want to intimidate you." Robert was by her side when she heard the news. His usually unshakable eyes betrayed an uncomfortable flame, a mix of fear and anger. "I won't let them attack us without a response," he declared. A firm voice trembled in the background. However, it was in these moments that the couple discovered that their greatest battle was not against external enemies, but against the distance and weariness that pressure inevitably generates. One night, when everything seemed to be crumbling, Emma stepped away to the bedroom, leaving Robert alone in the living room, illuminated only by the computer light and the storm raging outside. She felt her body weary, her mind fighting against silent despair. After a few minutes, Robert went to where she was, sat beside the bed, and in a rare gesture, touched her hands with a tenderness that spoke more than any words. "I know it hurts," he confessed. "I'm scared too." She looked at him, and in that moment, the division between them seemed to dissolve. "No matter what happens," Emma said, her voice trembling but firm, "I want to see this through, with you." "Then let's do it together," Robert replied, his eyes shining with a mix of determination and vulnerability. Honest, even when it gets tough. They breathed in the shared silence as the rain pounded against the windows with renewed force. Outside, New York seemed to continue its eternal struggle against the night. Inside, two hearts sought the same fine line between hope and fear, and in that instant, the certainty that nothing would separate them, not even fate, was what kept them standing. Let's do an experiment. If you're following this story, write "passionate" in the comments. Your participation is very important. The sun barely rose on the horizon, painting the lined buildings of Fifth Avenue with a pale golden hue. Emma awoke with the first rays streaming through the thin curtains of the apartment, feeling her skin prickled by the lingering memory of the rainy night. The internal storm still hadn't subsided, although the morning chill brought a brief sense of renewal. Robert was already in the kitchen, his face illuminated by the soft morning light, preparing coffee with an almost ritualistic care. The aroma of roasted coffee mingled with the damp smell of the fern leaves in the pot by the window, creating an atmosphere of tenuous normalcy, almost conspiratorial against the external chaos. "Good morning," she said, her voice still hoarse from sleep. He smiled, a discreet but genuine smile, a rare flash of lightness. "Did you sleep well?" Emma confirmed her doubts, even though she knew the answer. "Not at all," she replied, moving closer and taking a still warm cup. They sat side by side, eyes locked, as if in that brief moment they sealed a silent pact. What followed was the comfortable silence of those who had spoken too much with gestures and glances in recent times. The day ahead was crucial. Emma and Robert had a meeting scheduled with investigative journalists, the last gear needed to ensure that the evidence they had gathered reached the right hands and didn't get swept under the rug of corruption and power. The modest apartment came alive in the rush of preparations. Digitized files, printed copies lined up like soldiers in formation, and glances seeking courage in each other's gestures. On the way to the location, a mix of hope and nervousness vibrated within Emma. The already heavy traffic, the hurried drivers, and the sound of horns composed the urban scene that seemed incapable of slowing down, even in the face of their tension. "Are you sure about this?" Robert asked, as his hands caressed hers in the passenger seat. "I am," she replied without hesitation. "This is our moment." Upon entering the cold room of a commercial building downtown, they were greeted by Mariana and Tiago, journalists of solid reputation committed to the truth. The white fluorescent light reflected off the screens, where data and reports awaited the confirmation to publish. "You have something monumental," Mariana said, handing a coffee to Emma. "But it requires ethics and security. These allegations can demolish reputations and involve dangerous people." Emma felt the weight of the words, but also the strength they carried. "We are prepared for the consequences," Robert asserted, his voice firm, as if each syllable built a wall against intimidation. Tiago went into detail that made them swallow their anxiety. "The report will be published in chapters, keeping you protected by confidentiality. And for that, we will set up a scheme for digital and personal security." In the following days, life would oscillate between the exhausting routine of investigations and fragile moments of comfort. Emma and Robert made it a point to find breath in small instances: a hot dumpling in Chinatown, coffee at cramped counter tables, and the exchange of glances that spoke of dreams and fears. But peace was always temporary. With each advance in the allegations, the attacks increased. Social media hacks, anonymous threats jumping from emails to posters plastered in strategic points around the city, all intensifying the feeling of being cornered. One morning, Christina, Emma's sister, appeared at the apartment unannounced, bringing a blanket scented with lavender that reminded them of childhood. "I can't take this anxiety anymore," she confessed, sitting on the couch with a heavy sigh. Emma lifted her eyes, her body weary from the whirlwind of emotions. "Neither can I," she admitted. Christina took her sister's hands in hers, firm and supportive. "But we are together. You are not alone." Robert entered the room, his expression soft, and sat beside them. "No one is alone in this," he said, his strong tone encouraging like an anchor. The invitation to the press conference arrived on a sunny morning, like a call to light after weeks of shadows. The auditorium reserved for the event buzzed with the contained murmurs of professionals waiting for the revelation. Emma and Robert arrived side by side, embodying the balance between informality and the respect for the historical moment. The camera lights, the flashes, the attentive gazes. It was all an intense theatre that both were determined to star in. The presentation began with Mary, who opened the event, highlighting the extensive investigative work and the irrefutable evidence. Then, it was their moment. Emma felt her pulse quicken, her mouth dry, but she took a deep breath and held Robert's hand. "All we want," she began, her voice firm and clear, "is justice for the victims of lies and manipulation that seek to destroy not only works, but lives." Robert added, "It's not just about art or money. It's about honesty, transparency, and above all, it's about the courage to face those who think they are above the law." The press conference brought a storm. Headlines, debates, social media outcries. The whole city was commenting, divided between supporters and detractors. After difficult weeks, the couple knew they had planted a seed of transformation. And even with the road still long and arduous, their connection remained strong, fueled by the certainty that love and justice walk together, even when the price of truth is high. Let's do an experiment. Those following this story, write passionate in the comments. Your participation is very important. The dust of the storm of accusations had not yet settled when Emma and Robert discovered that the struggle was entering a new phase. A battle even more subtle and dangerous, where masks fell and true intentions revealed themselves in every silent gesture. The following weeks felt like a complex choreography, with endless meetings between lawyers, press advisors, security experts, and crisis managers. Every step needed to be calculated, a delicate dance between exposing the truth and protecting what they valued most, their integrity and each other's lives. It was a grey winter morning in Greenwich Village, when the two took refuge in a discreet coffee shop among colourful graffiti and the aroma of freshly baked cheese bread. The rustic wooden tables and blue ceramic cups gave a cosy air, contrasting with the turbulence they felt beneath the surface. Robert stirred his warm coffee thoughtfully, his gaze fixed on Emma. His eyes carried a mix of concern and determination. "We need to think about the next move," he said, breaking the silence with a firm yet tense voice. "This pressure isn't going to lessen, and they won't back down." Emma nodded, feeling the weight of that realization in her spine like an invisible anchor. "We can't make mistakes now. The public is watching, and any slip-up, real or fabricated, could bring us down." At that moment, Mary appeared at the coffee shop tables, bringing news that oscillated between cautious hope and severe alert. "I received anonymous contacts offering to reinforce your security," she informed, her eyebrows furrowed. "The message is clear. They also have their own resources to counterattack." Robert closed his eyes, a cold sweat trickling down his forehead. Being on a board where the pieces moved without warning made everything unpredictable and more frightening. Emma squeezed his hand tightly, a silent gesture of mutual strength. "Together, always," she murmured. That very afternoon, in the makeshift office they had turned into a headquarters, a new crisis emerged. An email had gone viral on social media with manipulated images insinuating a betrayal between them, creating a false spectacle that could destroy the hard-earned credibility. "This could ruin everything," Robert said, incredulous, his voice choked with a mix of anger and fear. Emma did not look away. "We will expose the truth. The truth withstands everything," she replied, her voice firm despite the cold tightening in her chest. "But the intensity of the pressure takes its toll." The tension between them grew one night when heavy words shattered the delicate stability. Robert, linked to the exposed wound, questioned in a low, cutting voice, "Why do you seem to doubt me now?" Emma, with teary eyes, replied, "It's not a matter of doubt. It's the fear of losing what we have." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken emotions, fears, and the urgent need to maintain unity to weather the storm surrounding them. Meanwhile, a new piece entered the game. Robert received a message with a mysterious invitation for a private meeting with the hidden leader of the network they sought to dismantle. It was a rare, dangerous opportunity to glimpse the true backstage of the machinery being dismantled, and perhaps find a strategic exit. On the appointed night, the setting seemed straight out of a noir film. A dark warehouse in the waterfront area, the smell of oil and rust permeating the air, and only the distant sound of trains breaking the sharp silence. Robert entered alone, his heart a rapid drum against his ribs. On the other side of the room, a hooded figure awaited him, their eyes shining with unsettling intensity. "Do you want to stop this?" The deep voice sounded like a warning. "What price are you willing to pay?" Robert wanted to respond with courage and truth, but he realized that this was an ambiguous offer full of hidden traps. He sat down and listened attentively. Dark revelations came to light. Obscure political connections, despotic financial interests, camouflaged by false cultural values, silent alliances sustaining the empire they were trying to topple. While Robert negotiated with shadows, Emma faced her own battle in the background, the growing public scrutiny, personal attacks, and the pressure of being the face of that movement rising from the ashes. One day during breakfast, still shaken by negative press from manipulated media, Emma looked at Robert, her eyes shining through the fear. "I don't know if we will win," she whispered almost to herself. But I won't stop trying. Robert took her hands in a simple yet profound gesture. Neither will I, he replied with a voice filled with determination. The sun finally managed to break through the dense clouds of the New York morning. They were no longer the same. The results were still far off, but they were there, embraced, warriors in a scenario where love and justice demanded sacrifice and courage. They were aware that this was just the introduction to a journey that could change not only their lives, but the fate of many. Let's do an experiment. Those following this story write passionate in the comments. Your participation is very important. The peak of tension seemed close, but the calm before the storm brought its own pains. Emma and Robert, now aware of the magnitude of the network they faced, felt the slow drag of pressure corroding their moments of rest like an insidious humidity. On a Friday afternoon, New York was immersed in its routine chaos. The traffic exuded the smell of exhaust fumes, mixed with the aroma of coffee and dumplings from the street vendors. They walked side by side down Fifth Avenue, the sun already bidding a shy farewell behind the skyscrapers, and a breeze carried distant conversations and scattered laughter. "We need to think beyond the next headline," Robert commented, his voice hoarse from fatigue, his eyes fixed on the glassy city that never sleeps. "It's no longer just about us. It's about the people who believe in the truth we expose." Emma nodded, the warmth of his hand intertwined with hers, bringing comfort. "I know. And that puts us in a delicate position. The exposure, the threats. It's clear they will try to destroy us in every way." They had become noise and target, but also voice and hope. Anxiety gnawed at them. The feeling of constant vigilance was a weight on their backs. Each step became uncertain, and every shadow a suspicion. "Have you ever felt fear, real fear?" Robert confessed, almost a whisper. "More than ever," she admitted, her eyes misty. "But it's the kind of fear that paradoxically makes me want to move forward." The next day, an anonymous email crossed Emma's laptop screen. Images of her family members, photographed without permission in intimate moments, accompanied by veiled threats. Her heart tightened, a pain that could not compare to personal fear. There were tears and external forces mixed, trying to attack beyond the body, invading the sacred territory of affection and history. Robert, beside her, decisively closed the laptop. "This is war, Emma, but we cannot retreat." "We are on the front line," he asserted, hugging her firmly. They sought refuge at Emma's mother's house in Brooklyn. The place was an oasis of memories and simplicity, where the white tiles of the kitchen, the old fan, and the aroma of cornmeal cake ensured some peace. "Your mother was right in saying you form a trench," Christine said, sitting down with a tired smile. Her eyes filled with mixed pride and fear. Time did not forgive, and Emma's body began to show the signs of battle. Sleepless nights, dark circles that could not be hidden under makeup, and a restlessness that made her hands tremble at the slightest sign of tension. Robert felt the price too. He spent hours staring at the ceiling of the bedroom, trying to tame the ghosts that emerged silently. Memories of old traumas now laid bare, exposing vulnerabilities he had never admitted. It was on one of those rough, starless nights that Emma found her friend and lawyer, Robert Ramos, quickly nicknamed Rob, in the group forming around them. In a breath-catching conversation, between slow sips of bitter coffee in a nearly empty dive bar, the lawyer issued a cold warning. "Don't be fooled. The network you challenge is not just made up of profiles obscured by glass rooftops. There are people who don't measure consequences, who don't hesitate to use any means necessary. We need to shield not only the legal action, but your personal and digital security." Emma swallowed the reality hard, feeling the cold mix with determination. "Let's do this. I want Robert and me to be ready for whatever comes." In a joint effort, they began to reinforce security, hiring cybersecurity specialists and dedicated agents. The apartment underwent subtle but necessary changes. Cameras, reinforced passwords, quick responses to any sign of intrusion. Despite this, the routine consumed them. Multiple meetings, reports, summons for testimonies, and constant media coverage. One day, amidst this avalanche of events, news hit like a punch. Emma and Robert's main political allies officially distanced themselves, fearing retaliation and loss of prestige. It was a cruel blow, making clear the loneliness of those who choose to face the system with their heads held high. But in that small room of Emma's house, among cups of coffee cooling on the table, she and Robert decided not to give up. "Staying here and lamenting won't change anything," she said, her eyes vibrant. "If it's not you and me, who will it be?" Robert smiled, despite the sadness. "There is strength in what we do, no matter how much they try to erase it." And in that moment, between whispered promises and veiled tears, they renewed their strength. They knew the fight was bigger than them, that the next steps could be the most dangerous, but they also understood the value of hope that insisted on growing even when everything around seemed to want to extinguish the light. They were ready to move forward, no matter the cost, and New York, that bare and grey afternoon, seemed to understand, for beneath its skyscrapers, two hearts resisted, beating strong, filled with courage and love. Let's do an experiment. Those following this story write passionate in the comments. Your participation is very important. The night fell heavily over New York, shrouded in a fine mist that brought the damp smell of recent rain mixed with the distant aroma of the cafes still open on the busy streets inside the apartment. In the Brooklyn neighborhood, Emma stared at her cell phone screen with a tense expression. A new message had arrived, different from the previous ones. Old photographs of her family, familiar addresses, detailed schedules of family routines laid out with precise details. The silent threat became palpable, as if danger was at the door, lurking at every step they took. "They know exactly where we are." Her voice was low, almost a whisper, filled with a disturbing mix of fear and determination. Robert moved closer to her side, feeling the weight of that moment. He squeezed her hands, an instinctive gesture of protection and solidarity. "Who is behind this?" he asked, trying to control the tremor in his voice. "We're not sure, but without a doubt, it's someone willing to escalate the intimidation game," Emma replied, swallowing the anguish that threatened to overflow. The routine, already exhausting, transformed into a careful chess game of precautions. Mornings began earlier. The streets of New York turned into a maze of altered destinations. The apartment that was supposed to be a safe haven became equipped with advanced systems, strategically placed cameras, passwords reinforced with biometrics, blockers for unknown signals, and constant surveillance. Freedom, imperceptibly, was traded for the rigidity of vigilance, a high price for a battle that demanded every drop of protection. Meanwhile, Emma's family, led by her mother Christine, joined forces to transform their home into a bastion of comfort. Amid the white tiles of the kitchen, the sweet smell of cornmeal cake baking in the oven, and the gentle breeze coming through the slightly open windows, the spirit of resistance took on other forms, less visible, more human. "You won't walk this road alone," Christine said, holding her daughter's hands firmly, a shield of love and protection. However, the battle transcended the physical space. With the same veracity they advanced through the streets and courts, the opponents fought in the digital realm. Social media became weapons, fake profiles spread unfounded news, edited videos dripped poison and attempted to undermine the image that Emma and Robert had worked so hard to build. Emma faced that attack as one observes a storm, intense but fleeting. "If I respond to every word, I will lose my strength," she confided in a moment of pause, her voice hardened by fatigue. Robert knew that internal battle as well as anyone. On quiet nights, he isolated himself on the balcony, staring at the city lights that shone like distant fragments of hope. He faced not only external threats, but also the ghosts of the past that resurfaced with renewed strength, threatening to crumble the firm facade he had built with such effort. One dawn, when the city seemed to sleep, Emma noticed the distance growing between them, a silent space made of unshared worries and pains. "You're so far away, even though you're right next to me," she said softly, her voice heavy with contained emotion. Robert turned his face to her, his eyes reflecting the yellowish light of the lamp on the table. "Sometimes I feel like I carry a weight I can't share. Maybe it's the price of wanting to change the world," he confessed, with a frankness he had never admitted before. She reached out, touching his hand, and found in that simple contact the strength she needed to continue. "Then we will carry this burden together, no matter the cost," she promised. In the following weeks, the struggle took a crueler turn. The political allies who had once supported their cause began to distance themselves publicly, fearful of reprisals that could compromise their careers and reputations. The loneliness that had once been bearable became fierce, sober, a cruel reminder that challenging the system came at a heavy price for those who dared to do so. Sitting in the small living room of Emma's apartment, among the already lukewarm coffee cups and the heavy silence, they spoke like two souls who, despite their wounds, did not want to let the dream die. "Staying here lamenting won't change anything," she said, her eyes fixed on his, an unyielding spark. "If it's not us, then who will it be?" Robert smiled, allowing a contained sigh. "The strength lies in what we do, even when they try to extinguish our light," he replied, his voice choked with hope. In that moment, between whispered words and tears that did not fall, they found new breath, a silent understanding that they were about to face perhaps the most dangerous steps of this journey, but also the conviction that the flame of hope would never be extinguished. New York, with its grey buildings and overcast sky, seemed to pull the breath along with them, witnessing two hearts that resisted, beating strong amid the storm. And so, under the heavy mantle of that cloudy afternoon, they prepared to move forward, knowing that the price would be high, that the path could be tortuous, but that giving up would never be an option. Let's do an experiment. Those following this story, write passionate in the comments. Your participation is very important. The eve dawned grey and heavy, as if the city itself anticipated the weight of the days to come. Emma adjusted her scarf with slightly trembling hands, staring into the narrow mirror of the apartment hallway. In that reflection, she saw a woman marked by sleepless nights and decisions that seemed to grow with the intensity of a storm without warning. But deep in those tired eyes, there was a spark that would not go out, the visceral determination of someone who believed change was possible even when the world conspired to prevent it. Robert waited in the living room, his hands firmly intertwined, as if holding his own balance. He watched the city through the window, a tangle of avenues, buildings, and invisible whispers. Everything seemed so distant, yet at the same time, threateningly close. At times, he felt as if loneliness tightened his chest in an invisible shackle, a price he paid for desiring transparency in a world that hid in dense shadows. "Are you ready?" The soft yet firm voice came from the edge of his lips broke the heavy silence. Emma turned slowly, a smile that mixed fear and courage lighting up her face. "We can find that strength," she replied, her quick breaths controlling her anxiety. They dressed in discreet clothing, ready for the meeting that could change the course of their fight, a confidential meeting with a select group of allies who remained silent, fearful, yet willing to take a stand. The promise was of a joint strategy that could disarm the attacks of those hiding in the shadows of power. Outside, the cold atmosphere caressed their faces, the asphalt reflecting the yellow lights of the street lamps, creating paths that seemed to guide their steps like an invisible orchestra. Upon arriving at the modest building where the meeting would take place, the heavy door creaked under Robert's firm touch. The narrow staircase with peeling paint led them to a stuffy room where 6 figures awaited, wrapped in expressions that revealed fears and hopes. "You came," said the woman leading the small group, an experienced politician with eyes brimming with fatigue and determination. "It wasn't easy to find the courage for this, I know." Emma nodded, her heart pounding against her ribs like an insistent drum. "This isn't the first time fear has tried to silence the truth," she said. "But the prevailing silence facilitates corruption. It's time to break this cycle." The conversations that followed were tense, with carefully chosen words, implications, and glances that weighed more than clear statements. They presented new documents, carefully gathered evidence pointing directly to those responsible for the manipulations and threats. Amid murmurs, they coordinated measures to expose the falsehoods and protect one another, an invisible support network that, though tenuous, carried the power of unity. For the first time in weeks, Robert felt a thread of true hope. The fight would be arduous, no doubt, but the possibility of no longer being alone gave him strength to breathe with less weight. As they left the building, evening had already fallen, tinting the New York horizon with orange hues that contrasted with the predominant grey of the previous days. In the busy street, an unknown man studied them from a distance, his cold eyes shining in the dim light as he disappeared into the crowd. Emma sensed the presence, her body stiffening, but Robert held her in a protective gesture. "We won't do this alone," he promised, his voice firm yet gentle. Upon returning home, they found the discreet building entrance marked with recent vandalism. A graffiti message on the wall, "Shut up or you will fall." The thin air seemed to pulse with the latent threat. The war they waged was not just political but personal, and now the line between public and private blurred. In the silence of the night, as the city lights flickered like distant stars, Emma and Robert sat at the kitchen table. Between glasses of cold soda and the strong smell of freshly brewed coffee, they exchanged glances that contained more than words. "You know, sometimes I think about how this will all end," Emma said, breaking the silence. "If we will be remembered or just erased from memory." Robert smiled, tired yet resolute. "I think what we do goes beyond what is recorded in books or news," he said softly. "What matters is who we are when no one is watching." She smiled, feeling the warmth radiating not just from the glass in her hand, but from what they shared, a fight for justice amid chaos. In that early morning, New York was not just concrete and asphalt. It was a living field where courage blossomed in small gestures, contained silences and tight hugs that warmed more than any blanket. And as the city breathed heavily under the hidden stars, Emma and Robert prepared for the next chapters, certain that the price of truth would be high, but that the love that united them would be the strongest armor against any storm. Let's do an experiment. Who is following this story? Write in love in the comments. Your participation is very important. The silence of the early morning was deep, interrupted only by the faint buzzing of electronic devices, silent watchers at their post. Emma and Robert could barely close their eyes. The worries formed a restless current that prevented rest. It had been a heavy day, filled with meetings, analyses, and decisions that breathed urgency and fear. Now, sitting side by side on the living room sofa, they shared the weight of uncertainty and the uncertain future that awaited them. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Emma asked, in an almost affectionate tone, seeking to break the tight knot that seemed to tighten their chests. Robert returned the smile, still tired, but finding in that memory a pause, as necessary as it was rare. "Of course. Your way of smiling even when you seemed tired, and the way you faced the world with such courage." "I knew it wasn't just a common fight. It was something bigger," he replied, his eyes shining with the sincerity of the moment. She nodded, feeling the calm pulse of that bond that sustained them. "Sometimes I feel like we have become what we always feared, a target and a refuge at the same time," Emma confessed. "A strange paradox, isn't it? A paradox that teaches the value of resilience," Robert countered, intertwining his fingers with hers. And perhaps that's why we continue, even when everything seems to conspire against us. His presence was an invisible shield, alleviating the weight of the shadows that planted themselves in every corner. They both knew that the battles would transcend the political ground, entering even darker and more personal domains. The anonymous messages, veiled threats, and even the shadow of silence from former allies were no longer strange. They were part of the long road they had chosen to tread. In that New York early morning, the light rain began to fall, its cold drops hitting against the windows the irregular rhythm echoed like the pulse of their anxious hearts. The smell of wet earth filled the apartment, bringing an ambiguous sense of renewal and challenge. Emma felt her face seek refuge among Robert's hair, a silent gesture of comfort and surrender. After all this, will we make it? Her voice trembled, laden with the fragility she rarely showed in public. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if seeking answers from the depths of his soul. We have no choice, he affirmed. But this choice is also our strength. It's the commitment we made not just to ourselves, but to everyone who believes in something better. Between sighs and unspoken promises, they embraced with the intensity of those wanting to imprint on their bodies the warmth necessary to face the cold nights and challenging mornings. They knew the coming days would be decisive, that they would face unexpected storms, but they also carried the certainty that the love they were building would be the strongest fortress they could erect. The clock marked the early hours of the day when the shrill sound of the phone shattered the tenuous peace. Robert picked up the device with steady hands, his eyes meeting the illuminated screen displaying an unknown name. "Who could it be now?" Emma murmured, positioning herself beside him. The call brought a calm yet urgent voice. "This is the security team from the White House. We have information about suspicious activity involving people close to you. The risk has increased over the last 2 days. Reinforce all precautions, and above all, stay alert." The air in the room seemed to freeze. Robert and Emma exchanged quick glances, their silent understanding cutting any space for doubt or hesitation. "Let's prepare for the worst," he stated, determination now transformed into action. In the following hours, the apartment became a command center, computers open, phones ringing, strategies being outlined. Each shadow cast by the flickering lights seemed to carry an invisible threat. Every noise from the street could herald an attack. Amid this whirlwind of actions, Emma received a message that made her hands tremble. A photo of Robert, taken secretly as he left an ally's house. The message was clear. They were not just surrounded, they were being watched. She felt a wave of anger mixed with a cold fear that ran down her spine. However, instead of allowing herself to be paralyzed, she gripped Robert's hands tightly. "They may try to take us down, but they won't destroy what we've built," she assured, her voice firm, her eyes shining with fire. Robert squeezed her fingers, a silent response of absolute partnership. And so, amidst the New York that never sleeps, between concrete and heavy clouds, 2 hearts beat relentlessly, tirelessly, ready for the next fight, certain that love and justice were worth every risk, every scar.